The farm was called Hinterkaifeck. It was not really a town, it was just a place. A few buildings set back from the road, hidden by trees. It was isolated, in Bavaria, Germany. The year was 1922. Life was hard. The Great War had left scars on everyone and everything. People were poor, suspicious, they kept to themselves. The Gruber family, who lived at Hinterkaifeck, were no different. In fact, they were more isolated than most. Andreas Gruber was the patriarch. His wife, Cecilia, was 72. She was frail, a ghost in her own home. Then there was their daughter, Victoria Gabriel. She was 35, a widow. Her husband, Karl, had been killed in the war, or so everyone thought. Victoria had 2 children, Cecilia, aged 7, and Josef, aged 2. The family was strange. There were dark rumors about them. Rumors about Andreas and his daughter Victoria. Rumors that little Joseph was not just his grandson, but his son, too. The kind of rumors people whisper but never say out loud. In late March of 1922, strange things started happening at the farm. Andreas told neighbors he found footprints in the snow. They came from the forest and led to the farmhouse, but there were no footprints leading away. It was as if someone had walked to the house and vanished, or worse, stayed. Then he heard footsteps in the attic. He searched, but found nothing. A set of house keys went missing. A newspaper appeared on the farm that no one had bought. Andreas was a man who did not scare easily, but he was unnerved. He told people about it. He felt like he was being watched. He was. On Friday, March 31st, the family's new maid arrived, Maria Baumgartner. It was her first day. It was also her last. She never had a chance to leave. That evening, something terrible happened. The family, one by one, was lured into the barn. First Victoria, then her mother Cecilia, then her father Andreas, then little Cecilia, the granddaughter. They were killed with a mattock, a heavy pickaxe-like farm tool. The killer struck them in the head. Over and over. It was brutal, personal, full of rage. After killing the 4 in the barn, the killer went into the house. He found the last 2 victims, the maid, Maria, in her bedroom, and little Josef sleeping in his cot in his mother's room. He killed them both the same way. The farm went silent. The family dog barked. The cows mooed in the barn, but no people were seen. Not Saturday. Not Sunday. Not Monday. Neighbors noticed the mail piling up. They saw smoke coming from the chimney. They heard the animals, but the Grubers were private people. Maybe they were sick. Maybe they had gone away. On Tuesday, April 4th, a few men from the village decided to check. The farm was too quiet. It felt wrong. They walked onto the property. The dog was tied up. The doors were locked. They forced their way into the barn. The smell hit them first. Then they saw the bodies piled together, covered with hay. Andreas, his wife, his daughter, and his granddaughter. It was a slaughterhouse. They went into the house looking for the other 2. They found Maria in her room, her body covered by a sheet. They found little Joseph in his cot, his small body covered by one of his mother's skirts. 6 people, all dead. The police were called. The investigation was a mess from the start. They had no idea what they were dealing with. The scene was contaminated. People walked all over the farm. Evidence was lost, but they pieced together a few things. The murders happened on Friday night. But someone had been on the farm long after that. The cows had been fed. The dog had been given water. The food had been eaten from the kitchen. The beds had been slept in. The killer did not just murder the family and flee. He lived there for at least 3 days. He lived in the house with the bodies of the people he had killed. This is the central mystery of Hinterkaifeck. It is not just who did it, the case was never solved. But the bigger question, the more disturbing question, is why? Why did the killer stay? What kind of person butchers a family, including a 2-year-old child, and then calmly feeds their cows? What goes through the mind of someone who eats a meal in a kitchen just rooms away from the corpses he created? The answer to that question paints a picture of a killer unlike any other. It offers a profile in cruelty that is almost impossible to comprehend. To understand why the killer stayed, we have to first understand what staying meant. It was not a brief, panicked moment. It was a prolonged, deliberate act. For several days, the killer inhabited the world of his victims. He walked their floors, he used their things, he maintained their routines. The smoke from the chimney told neighbors that someone was there, keeping the house warm. The tended livestock suggested a farmer's care, a sense of duty. This was not the work of a frantic madman. This was something colder, something more calculated. Let's break down the possibilities. One common theory in murders is robbery, but that makes no sense here. A large amount of money was found in the house, untouched. A robber would have taken the money and run. They would not linger for a moment longer than necessary. Every minute spent at a crime scene increases the risk of being caught. A robber's goal is profit and escape. The Hinterkaifeck killer's goal was something else entirely. He was not interested in their money. He was interested in their lives. Or, more accurately, the end of them. So, if not robbery, what? The motive was almost certainly personal. The sheer violence of the murders points to that. The repeated blows to the head suggest a deep, explosive rage. This was not a clean, detached killing. This was a messy, hateful act. The killer likely knew the family, knew Andreas, knew Victoria. This was a settling of scores, a final, brutal answer to some long, simmering conflict. But rage alone does not explain staying for days. Rage is hot, it burns out. What the killer did afterward was cold. It required a level of detachment that is profoundly disturbing. To go from a frenzy of violence to the mundane task of feeding a cow requires a mind that can compartmentalize in an extreme way. It suggests the killer did not see the Grubers as people anymore. Once they were dead, they were just objects, obstacles that had been removed. With them out of the way, the farm was just a place, a shelter, a place to eat and sleep. This gives us our first glimpse into the killer's psychology. He possessed a terrifying lack of empathy. He was likely a psychopath, someone who does not feel guilt or remorse or the horror that a normal person would feel in that situation. For him, the house was not a tomb filled with his victims. It was just a house. The food in the pantry was just food. The bed was just a place to rest. He had switched off the part of his brain that connects actions to consequences, that connects a dead body to the living person it once was. So why stay? One reason could be a sense of ownership or entitlement. By killing the Grubers, the killer did not just end their lives. He took their place. For those few days, he was the master of Hinterkaifeck. He owned the house, the animals, the land. It was the ultimate act of domination. I have not only destroyed you, his actions seem to say, I have erased you and absorbed your existence into my own. He ate their food, slept in their beds, tended their animals, not as a panicked fugitive, but as the new lord of the manor. It was a twisted victory lap, a way of savoring his conquest. This performance of normalcy is what makes the act so chilling. It's a mockery of the life he just extinguished. He was playing house, he was performing the role of the farmer, the head of the household. This act of performing the victim's lives is a profound insult. It's a way of saying their lives were so insignificant that anyone, even their killer, could step in and do their chores. It strips them of their humanity twice. First with the mattock, then with the quiet, domestic routine that followed. There is another, more practical possibility to consider. Was the killer waiting for something? Or someone? Perhaps the massacre was not the final act. Maybe he believed someone else was coming to the farm. Or maybe he was looking for something he couldn't find in the heat of the moment on Friday night. The rumors surrounding the family might hold a clue. The paternity of little Joseph was a source of great conflict. Victoria had been in a relationship with a local man, Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Schlittenbauer believed Joseph was his son. He and Andreas Gruber had argued about it. He had a motive. He knew the farm. If the killer was Schlittenbauer or someone else involved in this dispute, perhaps he was searching for documents, or papers that could prove paternity, or a will, or some other secret the Grubers kept hidden. The murders might have been a means to an end, the end being the acquisition of some crucial piece of information. In this scenario, the killer stayed because his job was not finished. He spent the weekend ransacking the house, not in a chaotic way, but in a careful, methodical search. He stayed, tending the farm to maintain the illusion that everything was normal, to buy himself more time before the bodies were discovered. This theory fits with the idea of a cold, calculating killer. The rage of the murders could have been a prelude to a more rational goal. First, eliminate the family. Second, find what you came for. The feeding of the animals becomes a practical necessity. Crying, hungry animals draw attention. A silent farm is a normal farm. A farm with distressed livestock is a sign that something is wrong. The killer was not being kind to the animals. He was managing his crime scene. He was controlling the environment to protect himself. Let's look closer at the main suspects and see how this theory of staying fits them. Lorenz Schlittenbauer is the most prominent suspect. He had a clear motive. He had a volatile relationship with the Grubers, he was one of the first to discover the bodies, and his behavior was strange. He seemed to know his way around the farm a little too well. Some say he even disturbed the bodies, possibly looking for something. Could a man like Schlittenbauer commit such a brutal act and then calmly stay for days? It's possible. As a farmer, the routine of tending to livestock would be second nature to him, almost an instinct. In a state of shock or adrenaline, he might have reverted to these familiar tasks. His staying could have been a combination of searching for proof of paternity and a strange, almost robotic need to maintain the farm's rhythm. Well, he was a man deeply invested in the idea of being the father and master of that family. Perhaps, in his twisted mind, he was finally taking on that role. Then there is the theory of Carl Gabriel, Victoria's husband, the man who supposedly died in the war, but his body was never identified. There were rumors that he had survived, that he was back in Germany. If he returned to find his wife had a child with another man, or worse, with her own father, his rage would be immense. As a soldier hardened by war, he would be capable of extreme violence. He would also be trained to survive, to be patient, to control a situation. For him, Hinterkaifeck was his home, a home that had been defiled. By killing the family, he might have felt he was cleansing it. By staying, he was reclaiming it. He would know the farm intimately. He would know its routines. His actions after the murders would be those of a man taking back what he believed was his. He wasn't just a killer, he was a soldier retaking his territory. This idea of reclaiming territory is powerful. The killer did not see himself as an intruder. He saw himself as the rightful owner. This explains the lack of fear. A typical killer would be terrified of being discovered. They would hear every creak of the floorboards, jump at every shadow, but the Hinterkaifeck killer seemed to be at peace. He was comfortable, he made the house his own. This suggests a deep-seated belief that he had a right to be there. Whether this right came from a spurned love, a claim of paternity, or a broken marriage vow, the result was the same. A bloody conquest, followed by a quiet occupation. The cruelty of this occupation cannot be overstated. Imagine the psychological state of the killer. He is living in a world he has just emptied. The silence is a silence he created. The ghosts of the family are everywhere. Their clothes, their food, their scent in the air. A normal person would be driven mad by this. The guilt and horror would be unbearable, but this killer was not normal. He was able to exist in that space, surrounded by the evidence of his crime, and feel nothing. Or worse, feel satisfaction. The act of covering the bodies is also revealing. The 4 in the barn were covered with hay. The 2 in the house were covered with sheets and clothing. Why? It was not an act of respect. It was more likely a practical act of concealment. Or perhaps a way to put the dead away, to turn them from people into objects that could be ignored. Out of sight, out of mind. The killer could then go about his business without the dead staring back at him. It's another layer of the extreme compartmentalization. He could kill them, cover them, and then go make a sandwich. The act of staying also served another purpose. It delayed the discovery of the crime. For every day he stayed, the trail grew colder, evidence degraded, the timeline became blurrier. By the time the bodies were found on Tuesday, the killer was long gone, and the police were faced with a 4-day-old crime scene. It was a clever, if unintentional, way to muddy the waters. The killer gave himself a head start. He was able to disappear back into the world, leaving behind a confusing and chaotic puzzle for the authorities. We can also think about the killer's mindset in a more primal way. After an act of such extreme exertion and violence, he might have been exhausted, physically and emotionally drained, even for a psychopath. The farm, now quiet and isolated, offered a place to rest. A place to come down from the high of the murders, a place to think and plan his next move. It was a safe house, a fortress of his own making. No one would think to look for him at the very scene of the crime. It was the last place anyone would expect him to be. In its own twisted way, it was the perfect hiding place. So, we have a few converging ideas. The killer stayed out of a sense of ownership and domination. He stayed to perform a twisted victory lap, a mockery of the family's life. He stayed to search for something important. He stayed to control the crime scene and delay discovery. And he stayed because he could. Because he was a person so devoid of empathy that living amongst the dead was no more troubling than living amongst furniture. All these reasons point to a killer who was not just an outsider who stumbled upon the farm. He was intimately connected to it. The crime was the culmination of a story that had been unfolding for years. The murders were the climax, but the killer's stay at the farm was the epilogue he wrote himself. It was his final statement. The cruelty is not just in the killing, it is in the living. The act of tending the animals while their owners lay dead in the hay is a profound statement of coldness. It says that life goes on, but only the life the killer deems worthy. The cows are useful, so they live. The dog is a potential alarm, so it is tied up and cared for. The family is an inconvenience, so they are eliminated. It is a worldview stripped of all morality, a world of pure selfish utility. The case of Hinterkaifeck endures because it is a story with a gaping hole in the middle. We have the gruesome beginning and the baffling end, but the killer's identity remains a mystery. But by focusing on his actions in those 3 days, we can fill in a part of that hole. We can sketch a portrait of him. He was a man of great rage and great self-control. He was patient, he was methodical, he knew the land and the routines of farm life. He was strong enough to wield a mattock and kill 6 people, and he was psychologically empty enough to live with what he had done. He was not a monster in the sense of a mindless beast. He was a monster in a much more human and therefore much more terrifying way. He was a person who looked at a family, a home, a life, and decided it was his for the taking. And after he took it, he stayed a while to enjoy the view. That is the ultimate profile in cruelty. It is not just the act of taking a life, it is the act of occupying it. The killer of Hinterkaifeck did not just visit death upon the Gruber family. For a few short days, he became the ghost that haunted their home before the real ghost had a chance to settle in. He was a man who could murder a family and then sleep under their roof, breathing their air, living their life, because he believed he had the right. The question of who he was may never be answered, but what he was is written in the silence of those 3 days on the farm. He was a usurper, a performer, a cold, empty space in the shape of a man, and the days he spent there were the most cruel and telling part of his crime. It was his signature, left not in blood, but in the chilling illusion of normalcy. The smoke rising from the chimney was not a sign of life. It was a sign of a successful death. A death so complete that even the killer could pretend it never happened.